Hi there, this is Grumpy Opinions. Let's get on with the show. Snowpiercer is the story of two warring trains all smooshed together in a cold, icy apocalypse. Also, now it has Sean Bean on it, so that's a good thing. Episode 202, Smolder to Life, starts off exactly where the last one ended, with both trains still jammed together and everyone kind of a bit of an impasse. But this week, frankly, so much happened that a lot of this is going to be out of order, but stick with me through it. So Melanie's still in Big Alice, where they spam and very little else apparently. And Kevin's a prisoner on Snowpiercer, where they give him a cheeky Nando's and he ends up spilling the beans on how many people live on the train and how lacking in supplies they are. But both sides realise that a prisoner exchange is probably in their best interest, because the Snowpiercers want Melanie back and Wilfred wants to get his eyes on Leighton. So there's an exchange. And everyone does a little bit of eyeballing and a little bit of chatting, and it almost goes nuts right at the point when they switch over, because Alex comes running up, argues with her mum and then smashes the snow sample into the ground. But it turns out the sample itself is irrelevant because Mel already asked her about it, and unwittingly Alex gave up the key bit of info, because they realise that after launching a snow balloon out, that the world is actually warming back up again, like it will actually be warm enough for one day to support life.
Meanwhile,
Kev's really happy to be back on Big Alice, and to cheer him up, Wilfred says, "Oh, have a nice warm bath in my quarters." But then he climbs in himself, which makes Kev look a bit uncomfortable. And then Wilfred points out that Kev did give up some secrets, and him opening the door did cause the big battle last week, so sorry Kev, time to off yourself for the good of everybody. Which he does, quite almost happily, which is pretty grim.
meanwhile,
Sarah's been wandering about the train, trying to get work done with her new job helping out the medical bay, and she finds a frozen and nasty looking Josie, who isn't dead. And then she decides to try and kill her. But then she changes her mind, it doesn't kill her.
meanwhile,
Till's been promoted to train detective, and she goes off and does her Poirot bit, trying to find out who's been chopping people's fingers off, which is a new thing that started happening ever since the other train turned up. Meanwhile, Mel and the gang set up the train for a climate change summit and invite Wilfred over, and Wilfred ends up agreeing, because he wants Alex to do a murder on Leighton, with a hidden razor blade. And when he comes on board, it's a bit like the Beatles have arrived or something, and creepy LJ runs up and hugs him and's like, "Love you." And then at the summit, they explain about the global warming, and he's like, "Oh, that actually sounds okay I suppose, because it's not like he can really say anything else and not come off as some kind of evil dictator." So they cancel the murder plan, and Alex leaves a big bloody paw print on the train. And then Sarah tells Leighton all about Meat Popsicle Josie. And Till realises as he passes by that the finger chop is actually part of the Wilfred salute. But what could it mean? And who's doing it? So what did I think? Well, actually, so much happened this week that it was kind of interesting, to the extent that it zoomed by so quickly that I didn't really have much time to feel good or bad about an awful lot of it. I mean, there were quite short scenes with snappy dialogue and a huge amount of plot and a huge amount of character work going on. Now, it reminds me a lot of the early parts of Season 1, where there was so much promise in the show and so much exposition was being dumped in the first few episodes that you didn't really understand how paper thin most of it was, until it all just kind of started getting stupid later on. And there was some decent stuff this week. I mean, the forced suicide scene, I mean, that was kind of horrible, and it should be, but it was also played really well by the actors, and it felt suitably horrible for what was basically kind of a cliched scene. Also, this bit just, at the summit, for some reason, this line from Sean Bean just tickled me. I mean, I don't know, it really stuck with me. It just sounded very, very naturalistic, and, you know, his line delivery is always solid, he's a great actor, but particularly that line just, I don't know, it rubbed me the right way, and I just thought it was funny. And I do like the setup of the split loyalties on the train, you know, the idea that there's people who are still work for Wilfred and there's other people who are really definitely Snowpiercerites. And that means that there's good reason for the trainees to rise up against Leighton or Wilfred, depending on where their feelings lie later down the line, which of course is building up for another big battle of the trains like last season. But on the other hand, as I said, the suicide scene, as I said, it was a bit grim, and I'm really surprised that they actually managed to show it the way they did, because, I mean, let's face it, there was so much kerfuffle when they brought out that show on Netflix called 13 Reasons Why, and this is also a show on Netflix. But then again, it could be because people only cared about 13 Reasons Why because folk actually watched it, whereas this is a show that I'm pretty much sure isn't watched by absolutely anybody apart from me and the actors' mums. Also, that scene was a big cliche. You know, the bad guy decides to kill a henchman just so we can see how evil he is. I mean, that's the staple of every bad cheesy action movie and every James Bond film that's pretty much ever been made. And the big problem for me this week was Popsicle Josie. I mean, for starters, she should be dead. We saw in Season 1 that a breach means dead. We saw them wipe out the cows on the thing. We saw that the tube that was leaking in that room was cold enough to freeze off her finger and freeze off her hand. And that's, then suddenly that all burst into the room, and Mel only just managed to get out. And they said that some security brought her into the med bay, but they didn't know who she was because she was so badly frozen. But the thing is, she would be dead because she must have been in that room for ages. Because, let's face it, what were they going to do? They would have to wait till the room warmed up, and they'd need to stop the breach even before they could even get in there. And that kind of cold doesn't just give you frostbite on the surface, it actually would have destroyed your lungs, because that kind of cold rips your lungs apart, because the moisture in the air actually freezes into solid crystals that lacerate your lungs, like tiny bits of glass. Honestly, this is a real thing, you should look it up, it's interesting. But also, her eyes would have frozen, and I don't think you can fix that. So this whole bit where she opens her eyes at the end, no, I think she'd probably be blind. Possibly without actually having any eyes left in her head at that point, because they might have burst. Yeah, it's horrible, but accurate. And also, other than that, the blatant Wilford thing, which is so obviously a Hitler salute, that was cheesy as hell. But I'm watching Snowpiercer. What are you going to do? And that's all I've really got for this week. Who knows, if the rest of the season actually goes somewhere and doesn't get any worse than this episode, it might actually be a passable show. I wouldn't go any further than that. I wouldn't say it was great or even good, but it might not be as terrible as season 1 was. So till next time, these have been my grumpy opinions on Snowpiercer. And a special thanks to everybody listening, and especially my patrons, and most especially to Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma, my top tier patrons. Thank you everybody. Everybody stay safe. Cheerio.